All right, hey there, folks. Even with conventions, readings, and other author-type events back in action, I figured I'd keep bringing book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. And tonight is a super special-sized episode because this is episode 100 of my show, which trust me, I never saw that coming. And as an extra shout-out, tonight on our show, not only do we have Mary Fan, but my very first guest ever on this show was Mary Fan. So 1 and 100. So for you, Mary Fan, an extra Star Wars. May the Force be with you. All right. So the Star Wars universe has been expanding with new live action shows, including the continuing effort to bridge the new shows with each other, and with several animated series that filled in the backstories that we didn't get from the movies. That's why tonight we're going to be jumping back into a galaxy far, far away as we search the Force for Ahsoka, the Mandalorian, and the return of Thrawn. On our panel tonight is my friend, aerialist extraordinaire, and one of my fellow Crazy 8 press inmates, Mary Fan. Mary is the author of multiple novels and short stories focused primarily on intrepid heroines, and also writes reviews and essays about Star Trek, Quantum Leap, and of course, Star Wars. Welcome back, Mary 1 and 100.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me back.
All right. And what's behind you?
This is an assigned Ahsoka Funko. I am terrified to look up how much it's probably worth now. If it is mine, you can't have it.
Okay. Also on our panel is pal KRASAVA Myers, an author, entertainment journalist, and chief editor of the Star Wars news entertainment website Scavengers Holocron. Well, hello, KRASAVA.
Hi, nice to be back.
All right, good to see you. And rounding out our panel is my pal, ZAKI HASAN. ZAKI is a professor of communication and media studies and member of the San Francisco Bay Area Films Critics Circle. His reviews and analyses have appeared in venues such as the San Francisco Chronicle, IGN, and Philly Weekly, and he is co-host of the Movie Film Podcast. He has also contributed to books on the Planet of the Apes, Blade Runners, and Star Wars franchises. Welcome back, ZAKI.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
All right, good. Just a heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me notes or questions during the panel in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so in season 2 of The Mandalorian, we were introduced to the live action version of Ahsoka. And Ahsoka first appeared in the animated series, The Clone Wars, and then ultimately Rebels. Now, strictly speaking, what was about just that initial impression, just the first time we saw Ahsoka live action? So we're just talking about that initial episodes, what we saw her. What was your initial impression of Ahsoka based just on that appearance? So, Mary, what did you think when we first saw her?
I was over the moon to see her. I mean, who doesn't love a kick-ass Jedi lady with 2 blades? I will confess, I didn't watch the animated series. I'm a fan of Ahsoka more as a concept than from anything I've actually seen her do. But, I always loved her character design. I loved seeing how enthusiastic people who cosplayed her were at cons. And I was like, you know what? This character seems really cool. And so when she showed up on The Mandalorian, I'm like, yay, I'm here for this. Like, go Ahsoka.
All right. What about KRASAVA? What about you? What'd you think?
I have seen the Clone Wars and Rebels animated series, so I was a little more hesitant because I liked what they did with the character in the past. So I was like, how are they going to carry this character forward? How is her journey going to progress from here? And moreover, how is Rosario Dawson going to portray her overall as a character and add her own spin on the character? Like, would it make her too different, or would the transition be more seamless?
Okay. And ZAKI, what did you think? Again, just this is the first time we saw her live action Mandalorian.
I think for me, what was exciting was the way the live action side was embracing the animation side. As somebody, I loved Clone Wars, and I really enjoyed Rebels, and it always felt kind of at arm's length. So anything from the real Star Wars, which is the live action, at least that was the perception. So that's what I was excited about. It was like all this other Star Wars that I know a lot of people just dismissed. Oh, it's just a cartoon. Well, now it mattered, and that was very exciting to me.
Yes, I would agree with that. So, and for those who don't know, I know they mentioned it somewhat in the show, in the live action show of Ahsoka, but Ahsoka was, as we know, was Anakin's Padawan, and she was young at the time, and she was really put through some significant trials, tested in ways that maybe we never really saw with any other emerging Jedi, other than maybe Luke. But because there were so many episodes, we got to see a really full exploration of the character. So now Ahsoka, the character, and Ahsoka, the series, in my mind, are not quite the same, as the series itself is a bit more of an ensemble, right? And the arc of the season, we're talking about the live action that we just saw, relies pretty heavily on the world building that was created before that, both in Clone Wars and then as a direct continuation from Rebels. So I'm going to start with ZAKI, especially since you'd seen it all, and we'll get to everyone. Did you feel that you were, actually, I changed my mind. Well, I'm going to start with Mary for a minute, and then we're going to go around. So Mary, having not seen the animated series either, did you feel that you were given enough information throughout the live action series that you felt like you kind of knew where you were in the story and Ahsoka's story? Or do you feel like, you know what, to really appreciate what the live action show has to offer, maybe I do need to go back and watch the animated series? Or did you feel like you had enough?
I definitely did not feel like I had enough, mostly though from a character standpoint. So from a plot standpoint, I feel like they did give just enough information that, if you hadn't watched Rebels, you could kind of figure it out. I wish they had actually expanded a little bit more on that final battle that they mentioned that made both Ezra and Thrawn vanish. As someone who hadn't seen Rebels, I was a little confused by that. I had to, go on Wikipedia and be like, wait, where'd they go? But I wouldn't have minded that so much if the characters had felt more developed, especially since for a show about women, they spend an awful lot of time talking about the men who have disappeared. And because I didn't have that emotional connection to either Ezra as a hero or Thrawn as a villain, I'm just like, okay, the show is called Ahsoka, but we keep talking about Thrawn and Ezra. And so that was kind of frustrating. I also do feel like the live action series in general, I kind of wish they were more standalone, just because it's so hard bouncing from franchise to franchise. There is so much content out there. And I kind of thought when they kicked off with The Mandalorian that they were kind of setting reset on the TV shows. Like, okay, you still have Clone Wars and Rebels if that's your thing, but if you haven't watched them and you just want to start fresh, here you go. And I think The Mandalorian did a decent job of doing that, even though they were referencing things that happened in the cartoon series. You could still follow along. Ahsoka, I was hoping they would do the same, but I don't think they did as good a job. And even I think The Mandalorian toward the end there got a little too insidery. And look, I still want to watch the animated series in theory. I just don't have 100 extra hours to sit in front of Disney Plus. So it was kind of frustrating watching it from that perspective.
Okay, fair enough. So KRASAVA, what about you, as someone so you've seen everything? And I know maybe it's a little bit tougher because you did have a lot of information kind of coming into the series, but as much as you can, if you can sort of, compartmentalize your mind, did you feel that the live action show kind of gave either you or the general viewer enough information to sort of just jump in and say, okay, I'm with you and I get what's happening?
So that's an interesting question, because that's something I actually thought long and hard about months leading up to Ahsoka. Do I want to go back and watch all of the Clone Wars and then all of Rebels? And like Mary, I don't have hundreds of hours to just sit in front of Disney Plus and binge all this in order to watch 8 episodes of Ahsoka and like, oh yeah, I remember who this is and who that is. I definitely agree that, like, since it's been a while since I've watched everything, I felt like lost with oh wait, Ezra and then Thrawn, and they went into another galaxy. So now we're introducing like a whole brand new galaxy. Was that introduced in Clone Wars? Was that introduced in Rebels? I don't really remember. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. So I think it definitely, like, they could have done a lot better job of kind of like bridging the gap for people who haven't seen any of the animated series, because it kind of, fell flat. Like you said, it's called Ahsoka, but it was definitely more of like a live action next season of Rebels. Like, it was basically like the hunt for Thrawn. Like, you literally probably could have called it Thrawn, because it was all about finding Thrawn and Ezra, and all about the return of Thrawn, you know, bringing war back to the galaxy. So
ZAKI, what about you?
Yeah, I think definitely as somebody who watched the shows, it was fun to be like, oh, this is, you know, continuing that thing, or this is, oh, this is where these characters are now. But this is, I noted that in my review when it first dropped. I was like, I wonder how inside baseball this is going to play as for people who didn't watch those shows and who have not deemed them essential. You know, I wonder if it might have worked better to kind of slow walk into, you know, make your slow steps into a larger world, to paraphrase Obi-Wan Kenobi. You know, I think it does sort of drop you in and expect you to know who Sabine is. It expects you to know or to have some understanding of who Hera is. And again, for me, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. But that was my concern when I watched it. I was like, I feel like it's gonna be a lot for people coming in who are completely. I mean, when you think about it, if people have only watched the movies, the mere existence of Anakin having a Padawan is completely out of nowhere. And you know, when you watch the show, you realize her importance, but it's assuming a lot that people will be able to jump on with that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I thought really was lost in Mary, I think you're absolutely right. From a plot standpoint, you could sort of generally follow along what's happening, but from a character standpoint, Ahsoka, I would argue, is one of the single best characters in the entire Star Wars universe. She's absolutely fantastic, and what she goes through is particularly in the Clone Wars. I mean, what we see in the Clone Wars, if you ever get around to it, is that the version of Anakin in the Clone Wars is infinitely more interesting than the version we got in the movies. I mean, he is a real leader. You know, he's a little bit reckless, but he is badass, and he's on the side of right, and he really goes through painstaking efforts to train Ahsoka really in the best way he can, and she really goes through a lot, and a lot of that just doesn't translate onto the show, because how do you deliver 100 episodes or whatever, how many there were of content, and squeeze it into 8 hours of an ensemble show? So I think it was a little bit of a missed moment. And I do think even the very end in Rebels with what happened with Ezra and Thrawn, they could have done some very quick, I can't believe this happened, and they do a live action reenactment for 15 seconds just to kind of like bring you up to speed, and it would have made a lot more sense, but such is life. All right.
Add really quick that I really feel like the show could have benefited from flashbacks. Like you could have done that very quickly, just like a handful of very short seconds long flashbacks showing. I mean, they cast a teenage Ahsoka, and she was fantastic for the 5 minutes she was in it. They could have shown her first training with Anakin. Like that would have been really strong.
Yep. Yes. And even just like a small thing. So the character, the droid Chopper, who shows up a little bit, is so great in Rebels, but it doesn't translate. You don't know how great he is in the show because he's barely in it. And if you saw Rebels, you'd be like, oh my God, Chopper's back. This is so great. But if you didn't see the show, you're like, he's some droid. I don't know. Anyway. All right. So since we're talking about this really could have been called Thrawn, let's talk about Thrawn for a minute. So the entire series is centered around that, right? The old Imperial Guard trying to bring him back from exile. So again, I'm going to ask you, just based on what we saw here, because the character of Thrawn first appeared actually in Timothy Zahn's series, Heir to the Empire, 30 years ago, but then they brought him back in the animated show. Based on what you saw, was it worth the effort of trying to bring him back? So KRASAVA, what do you think?
Personally, Thrawn has always been one of my top 5 best Star Wars villains. So I was happy to see him come back. I've always felt like Darth Vader represented more of the fairy tale villain, whereas Thrawn represents the real life villain, because he's calculated and he's measured. He doesn't just, Darth Vader's so full of rage, and Thrawn, even I feel like they portray that very well in the live action series, is the complete opposite of that. It's basically all a game of chess. It's just about moves and counter moves. They're fighting, with their lightsabers, and all looks very cool, but mentally he's already 5 steps ahead, planning, things years down the line. So I was happy to see him come back, and I feel like, Filoni is setting up this much larger arc. So, I'm excited to see what they'll do with him, going forward.
ZAKI, what about you? So again, based just on what we saw in these 8 episodes, do you think it was worth it to kind of center this arc, this season-long arc about, trying to get him back or prevent him from coming back?
I think only in terms of the fan familiarity with the character, and I should stipulate I've not read the Zahn books, but I'm aware of how popular the character is. So I think in terms of taking a character that was sort of consigned to legends and pulling him into canon, into live action canon, I think it's worth having a piece on the chessboard, so to speak. The question, and I was going to say concern, it's more of a question. I wonder if fans will want a version of Heir to the Empire without Han, Luke, and Leia, which is what we seem to be heading towards. So it's kind of like, is this one of those things where you're trying to do something for fans that maybe they're not really going to want?
Interesting. So Mary, so for someone who doesn't have a relationship with the prior series, so you're coming in, what did you think about Thrawn? And with what you saw, does he seem like a character who was worth essentially, centering an entire season-long arc about his return or potential return?
So I do have some background with the character because I did read the Zahn books.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I also listened to them on audio, and the voice actor did a great job. So I was excited in theory when it was announced that he'd be entering the series. That said, I thought the pacing of Ahsoka was really off. Like, they had him as this off-screen threat for so long, but he didn't, because I hadn't seen the series, I didn't know, like, okay, like I'm familiar with him from the books, but why is he actually so dangerous in this incarnation? And that wasn't really made clear. And then you're spending episodes and episodes and episodes being like, oh my God, Thrawn. I'm like, what's the big deal? Who is he? And then they do the reveal, and I'm like, I'm sorry. That actor has a great voice. He does not look the part. He did not have the necessary menace, I felt, to carry the villain.
That's interesting, because I felt that at least if you can
Elon Musk is what I've heard him described as, and that is accurate.
Okay, can I just say, I saw him, they picked the actor because he does the voice in the animated series.
Yeah,
So
I read that. And his voice is fantastic, but he doesn't look scary.
Like, I saw him first, I was like, Elon Musk? It's Blue Elon Musk. Like, I thought the exact same thing the first time I saw him. And like, even just like watching clips of it, like I have a really hard time getting past it. Just looks like Elon Musk to me.
That's interesting, because what I like about the character is that, he's not menacing in the way that, like say, so Vader or Darth Maul, they're so like hyper aggressive and physical. He's very cerebral and very cold. But what I liked about him is that, and it's consistent with the character that we've seen before, is that he looks at losses as like, oh, okay, every loss you learn something. He sees everyone and everything as expendable. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the end game, and nothing else is important. And he sees everything that happens is just another way to glean information about his own team and who he's up against. So that I thought was interesting. But Mary, I do agree with you that the pacing, I think, as a series, pacing was not the strong suit here. All right. So Thrawn, meanwhile, could never have returned without his cadre of villains. So we got Balon Skull, his apprentice Shin Hati, and the Night Sister Morgan Elsbeth. So what did you think about them? So Mary, we'll start you. So you're new to most of these characters. So what did you think?
I really liked Balon. Even though I wasn't familiar with this character before, I thought the actor did a great job of portraying a sort of gravitas with that character. So and
R.I.P. Ray Stevenson. Oh,
I saw that and my heart broke. I was like, what? But I feel like I just met him as Balon, and now he's being taken away from us freaking universe. But yeah, I thought he did a fantastic job of lending that character a gravitas that maybe it wasn't even the script. Like, I think that was just him. Like, you took this character seriously. And as for Shin Hati, I liked her look a lot. I did take a little bit of issue with the fact that they always put her against Sabine, because this is a thing that action movies tend to do, which I find is kind of weird, where you always pit the small young woman against another small young woman. And so it almost felt like they created her just so that Sabine would have someone her size to be picked on by. But other than that, I was like, all right, you know what? The actress also did a great job of conveying an intensity. Like, oh my God, that stare is terrifying. I love it. As for the witch lady,
Yeah,
Morgan,
the Night
yeah,
Sister. Yeah.
I wasn't too keen on her. I mean, maybe it's just because I don't understand the lore, but I'm like, okay, what are you doing here? I don't get it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. So Zaki, why don't you take that one?
In so far as which aspect of it?
All right, so
The
Thrawn has his little cadre of villains who brought him back.
Right.
Right. So, but start with actually, I want to just for a minute, just start with the Night Sister, because I want to talk about this just for a minute. What was your take on the character?
I was intrigued, but I'll admit I did get sort of lost in the mythology a little bit, you know. And it's funny because I'm at the point now where I'm like, okay, is that a thing from a thing I've seen before, or is it a new thing? Like it's funny, right? Because like Star Wars canon, technically, official new canon is like whatever, not even 10 years old at this point, and I'm already lost in the weeds with a lot of it.
Yeah. So the thing is this, if you don't know, so the Night Sisters were very powerful witches in the Clone Wars, and they had fairly significant roles, and they were very prominent actually with Darth Maul coming back, and they were very scary. And I don't know that it completely translated to the show, and certainly the lack of history and context for who she was, I thought was missing. KRASAVA, what about you? Just not just the Night Sisters, but also with Balin and with Shin.
Yeah, I like the idea of, introducing like new villains slash old villains, like they're trying to pull the Night Sisters into it, but I feel like it didn't really work. Like the whole thing they were explaining with the spear, and oh, the Night Sisters came from another galaxy, and then they made a map of the galaxy, and then they put it in a sphere, and then they like hid it somewhere, and then they made a map, and you had to go find it. Like it just the show is supposed to be about Ahsoka, and then we're like navigating into like uncharted territories of like how the galaxy itself like actually came to be, and how did Thrawn even like know about this like Night Sisters, or like it was very very confusing. So like while bringing in new villains and trying to connect it to what's already established is cool, but at the same time it's sort of like it didn't feel like it fit in the actual show itself.
All right, so let's shift to the other side a little bit. And so we've got our little band of rebels. Predominantly, we have Sabine and we have Hera. Now, if you hadn't watched Rebels, they're completely new characters to you. So again, we're kind of basing this on what we saw on screen. So Zaki, talk to me about Sabine and Hera, and if you think what we saw in the show worked, didn't work, and if knowing a little bit about them before, how much it mattered, didn't matter for what we saw here.
I think it worked for the most part. I do feel like Sabine, her characterization was at kind of a different place, so there was a little bit of like adjusting to her interaction with Ahsoka. I really liked Hera. It felt like a very natural continuation, which is understandable because Dave Filoni. But the thought I had was, for me, I don't have a huge attachment to these characters in the same way that like kids growing up with them. But I was like, is watching Ahsoka for like the people who grew up with or really glommed onto Rebels, is watching Ahsoka what it was like for old Star Wars fans watching The Force Awakens, where it's like, here's where these characters are now later, and it's different, but it's similar, and it's kind of that same thing. And I'd love to talk to, kind of the Rebels generation, what they think about that.
So it's interesting. And I want to hear what you guys think. So Mary and KRASAVA also, is that so to me, Hera was in Ahsoka anyway, was in a way a little bit sort of like a more in control, like maybe a slightly more grounded version of Han Solo, right? A general for the resistance, but also a bit of a renegade herself, willing to bend the rules. But what you don't know, and what they don't really share in the show, is that Hera was so Ezra, who was missing, was trained by another Jedi. She had a son with that Jedi, so her son is actually a young budding Jedi, but they don't really talk about that in the show. But anyway, what did you think about Hera kind of in a way, and maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree, sort of in a way taking over like the Han Solo-ish role? Mary, do you think that's accurate, not accurate? Do you agree, not agree?
I mean, I again was not familiar with the character previously, and honestly, she left me cold. I just got nothing out of her other than that she's just gonna do what Ahsoka wants, I guess, and who cares about checks and balances? She's the hero. Oh my goodness, when C-3PO like came like forward with the get out of court martial free card, I was like, seriously? Are you kidding me? So I don't know, like her whole arc just left me completely cold. I'm like, it's not on the actress. She was acting her heart out. I just didn't think whatever they were trying to do with her translated for me.
All right, KRASAVA, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, the actress. Fun fact, if you didn't know, she's married to Ewan McGregor, so she's married to Obi-Wan Kenobi himself. So I love that like Star Wars tie in there. But I don't want to say her acting seemed like a little like stilted to me, but she didn't seem like very like passionate. Like in the animated series, she's very passionate and very like gung-ho and very energized. Whereas here she seemed more kind of like subdued. And I was really invested in, Kanan, like that whole, arc when he gets blinded and their love story. Like that's something that like even doing a flashback to the animated series and pulling that in, like there needed to be something more tangible to give us this, emotional attachment to the character. And there was just nothing there. She was there because we know her from Rebels, but otherwise her character really didn't have a point. Like you could have introduced a new character and I feel like it would have had the same kind of lack of emotional connection. Like I feel like it was just sort of fan service at that point.
Yeah, I happen to agree. I mean, I like the character, and if you ever go back and watch Rebels, that version of Hera is much more animated, has a lot more agency. Granted, it's in a slightly different place, but I don't know that it translated to the screen. All right, so every Star Wars story needs a good droid. What did you think about Yang, voiced by David Tennant? KRASAVA. Do you like him? Not like him?
David Tennant voiced it, in the animated series, so it was nice to have him come back. I was a bit confused when he said to Sabine earlier on in the episodes that she had absolutely like no like force ability like at all. Like out of all the people he's trained, she had like the very least. And then like at the end, when she finally needs to use the force, she can suddenly. So I feel like that cheapens it because all along we've sort of had this thing that anyone can be a hero, even if you don't have force powers, you can still be a hero. So I feel like it was nice, watching her go through the training and him helping her along, even though he didn't like really like believe that she had force abilities, that, she could still, become a hero. She could fight, she could train. And then I feel like the show kind of pulled the rug out from under us and just,
All right, fair enough. So, Mary, what'd you think? You like a new droid? You like him, not care? What'd you think?
He was fun the way he was portrayed. Again, I would have liked a flashback or two just for context. I was like, wait, since when were droids training Jedi? Like, can I get a little bit of a backstory of previously on here? So that part just confused me. But I like the portrayal. I thought it was fun to watch.
All right, ZAKI, any thoughts?
Hey, David Tennant. It's hard to go wrong with hearing his dulcet tones.
Yes. All right. So now let's dive in finally. Let's talk about Ahsoka herself. All right. So when we meet her now, she's in an interesting place in that, and this is kind of a two-part, I'm going somewhere with this, is that she is now Sabine's master, but she's also still Anakin's Padawan. How do you think that so she's playing these, and she's also on this quest to, thwart the return of Thrawn and possibly bring Ezra back. So there's kind of a lot going on with her. She's kind of, I guess, maybe this sort of it's a triad, right? She's got the training, she's still being trained, she's doing the training, and she's kind of on a mission. So, Mary, What'd you think about?
I thought the scenes she had with Anakin were her strongest scenes as a character. That was where you actually got to see who Ahsoka is as a person, because when she's on her mission, it's just like, I don't know, she just seems very focused on what she's supposed to be doing, and she almost feels more like a chess piece or something than an actual character. Like, one of my complaints about the earlier episodes was, for a show called Ahsoka, I really don't know who Ahsoka is as a person. And then when she had her Force vision with the flashback with Anakin and such, I was like, all right, okay, I'm starting to see this. You know, she's trying to come to grips like with some of the things she witnessed when she was still in training. So, and then of course she's trying to, you know, figure out how to then train Sabine, and there's that rift there. So there were some moments there that I really liked. But overall, I kind of wish her character were allowed to show more personality. I think that was just the writing. I mean, they seem to just not give her many opportunities to delve into who she is.
Zaki, what you think?
Yeah, I agree with what Mary's saying. You know, I think I love the way they've realized her character in live action, and I think Rosario Dawson's a great choice to play her. But I have a hard time connecting the thread from the animated Ahsoka to the live action one in terms of her personality and stuff. And it's not that I don't believe she's playing the same character. I would have liked to see some of the progression to get her to where she is now. Because she, you know, I feel like we missed a step a little bit.
KRASAVA, same, different? Agree?
Yeah, no,
Not
I feel
agree?
like the scenes where, you know, flashback to her being a child soldier were really, you know, important to showing, you know, who she is as a character and developing a bit more of an emotional connection, especially for people who haven't seen the show. But I feel like it was sort of like important to include, you know, the scene where basically if she does want to become Sabine's mentor, she has to basically figure out where she stands with the Jedi overall, because she left before she became a like true Jedi. So it's like Anakin giving her that vision and taking her back to when she was a child, showing her like, oh, you were a child, like you made decisions and people got killed, but like you were a child. Like the Jedi was raising child soldiers to go out and fight. Like this was not the right way. So like there is like basically I feel like it basically gave Ahsoka permission to chart her own course and maybe start training Sabine in a different way. But it came so late in the episodes, like we don't really get to see Ahsoka and Sabine really have that, you know, interaction to show, you know, where things, you know, will be going in the future.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So this is just one point, I think, and I just wanted to see if you agree or disagree. And to me, it was a continuity issue, so, or an inconsistency, I should say. So we see some scenes where Ahsoka is very deep, like she's very deep in meditation with the Force, and she's reaching out across the universe, right, to talk to Ezra or Sabine. I can't remember who it was, right? But she was like very deep, right? She does it. But when they were on the planet and they land the ship, how come Ahsoka didn't sense that Baylan and Shin, who have Force powers, were like over the next ridge? Right? I mean, isn't that how it's supposed to work? I feel a disturbance in the Force. It's like, shit, they're like over there.
I feel like the whole series was written and possibly even produced in a rush. So it could just literally be a plot hole.
All right, fair enough. Okay, I just one minor thing I'm throwing out. So, but I want to stick for a second because I did think that the scenes with where Anakin and for Ahsoka, the Anakin scenes were the most dynamic and most interesting. But what did you think about how they actually handled bringing Anakin back? And did you like this version of Anakin? Zaki, what'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, in terms of how his characterization,
just so we saw, you know, up until this point, you know, and we saw Anakin in the first few movies, and then he was, you know, right. Anakin the character was a significant character in the Clone Wars. If you hadn't watched the Clone Wars, you don't understand the depth of the character, because we didn't see it in the movies. He never got that opportunity. You know, we got a tiny taste of him in Kenobi. That was a very different version of Anakin. What'd you think about this version of Anakin in the live action, and how do you think they handled actually bringing him into this particular series?
I think, yeah, when you frame it that way, like you just take it for granted. You're like, oh yeah, and Anakin was Ahsoka's teacher. But yeah, for people who are coming in completely cold, they're going to be like, wow, he's likable and wise. He's not a petulant, a man child, right? Yeah, I mean, that really speaks to the work, the shovel work that Clone Wars did to make Anakin's fall, really hit hard if you watch the films with that show as context. Um, I'm I liked the characterization, but even more importantly, I'm really glad Hayden Christensen got to play the character this way. Like,
All right, there you go. That's what I was looking for.
it's really, like, that has been honestly one of my joys over the last 3-4 years, certainly. But getting to see Hayden Christensen realize that people like him, like he is loved by the fans of this franchise, because man, did people shit all over him for a long time. And I think I'm just happy he gets to re-engage with this character in a way that is really going to be meaningful for people who grew up with Clone Wars or who watched Clone Wars. But also, it's a new way for people who are coming. This will be the way in which people who missed Clone Wars will now go back to it, because they know Hayden as Anakin, and they'll get to watch that show now.
KRASAVA, what about you? What same question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they really played on the goodwill of people who have seen Clone Wars to really like reintroduce Anakin, doing the familiar smirk, the calling her Snips, just the way they interact with each other. And of course, I love seeing Hayden Christensen back on screen. He seems so much like happier with the role now. Like he seems like, you can tell when you're watching it, like he seems really like enmeshed in the universe. Like he's just happy to be there, and he's putting so much into this character. And I feel like you can really feel that.
So Mary, so clear, having not seen, the Clone Wars, we got a tiny glimpse of Hayden Christensen's Anakin in Obi-Wan, but that was a very, very different take on him. What did you think about this particular version of Hayden Christensen playing Anakin, and the way they brought him back into this particular show?
So first of all, I want to echo what ZAKI said and say I'm so glad that he's coming back to the franchise with this goodwill, because I feel like it's also forgotten sometimes how young he was when he received all that abuse. He was only like 18, 19 years old when he was cast as Anakin, and pretty much the minute he shows up on screen, people start complaining, because that's what Star Wars fans do. That said, it was always, I remember when I first watched Revenge of the Sith, finding it a little rushed in the characterization, because we didn't really get to see hero Anakin before he started falling in that movie. There just wasn't enough runtime. So it was nice to actually get to see hero Anakin. Like, this is the Anakin that everyone's mourning. This is the Anakin that, when people even in the original Star Wars movies start saying, oh man, Anakin Skywalker, he was such a good guy, like so sad, what happened to him? It's like, oh, this is the guy they're talking about. And it's also interesting because Hayden Christensen himself is a lot older than he was when he played Anakin originally, and that maturity comes through. Like, I almost wish there was a way to like insert that between episodes 2 and 3 and see, like, mature, wise Anakin before he becomes, petulant Sithy Anakin.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big thing, is that, in the movies, they told us about his fall, but we never saw Anakin at his peak in the movies, just because there wasn't enough runtime. The show, The Clone Wars, really does that, and they spend a lot of time with it. So from that perspective, it really pays off. But I think, for me anyway, the version that we got in Ahsoka was very close and more mature, even, just because, like you said, of his age and time that we got a chance to see. I'm really glad that they brought that into it. And I thought it brought, I like the dynamic where, because in this version, Ahsoka is, that species, they live a very long time. I think she said she was 60 or something like that. But still, he was sort of, he was still her, master. He had more experience and more wisdom. And I really appreciated being able in live action, getting this the first time live action that we saw that version of the character. All right, so a quick interlude for the folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat box and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so One thing I wanted to ask. So Ezra Bridger was a rising young Jedi who was lost into the far reaches of space along with Thrawn. So what did you think of Ezra when he finally returned? And did you care? I'm pretty sure I know the answer for Mary, but I'll ask anyway.
I mean, again, I thought the actor did a great job of portraying him. He was very, very likable and charming when he finally showed up about like what 80% of the way through the show. It was just very hard to care for the first 80% because we get a tiny, tiny hologram where you can't really even see his face. And then the next thing we know, like Sabine is in a way betraying Ahsoka for his sake. And I'm like, come on, give us a flashback. Like, show me why she cares so much. And then he shows up. I was like, okay, he's a nice guy. All right, he's nice.
Okay, ZAKI, any thoughts?
Well, it did feel a little bit to me like playing some of the same beats as The Force Awakens, where when Luke shows up at the end, it's they're doing something similar with Ezra. But again, I'll say what I keep asking. I'm like, for people coming in who have they're coming in with Ahsoka. That means nothing. Seeing Ezra, I was excited. I was like, oh man, it's great. It's Ezra. I was like, what does it mean to people who don't know anything about the character?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that it's unfortunate because they don't show it. And I don't know, assuming we get a season 2, which is certainly not a guarantee. I hope they do and get to see it. But Ezra really, he kind of was he was just a kind of a street kid, and he got discovered, and he went through quite the ordeal to finally kind of learn how to become a Jedi. But he was a good dude, and he had some scary moments character wise there, where he was tempted by the dark side, and he almost went the wrong way, and it was really special when he kind of evolved, and then when he sacrificed himself for everyone, it was pretty amazing. And we don't get to see that. We didn't get to see that in Ahsoka. All right, so real quick. This series was heavy on lightsaber duels. How did they do? KRASAVA, what did you think?
Cool to look at, definitely entertaining for a younger audience, but completely unrealistic in an actual, universe where you have to, depend on, fighting to survive. Like there were a lot of flips at one point. I remember the droids were all shooting at Ahsoka, and she did a backwards flip, and her legs went, closer, to the things that are, shooting at her. And I'm like, why would you do a flip like that when you're being shot at? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Or, when she's fighting with the 2 lightsabers, and then she like hits them both, and then it's like a pause, and it's like the dramatic effect shot. But it's like, again, that's not, it just, and not just Star Wars for any fight scene for me. Every time they do like the repeated, like action pose, and now we'll hit, like it takes me right out of it. But I think for a younger generation watching it, I think it definitely brings something different to the table, as opposed to like what they just finished up with Andor, where it was very slow and character driven. I feel like this is sort of like, oh yeah, like the Disney Plus series are for a younger audience. Like, let's get that excitement back in.
Yeah, but Mary's like, but you don't understand, when we do circus arts, we do it to show off. That's why we do it.
Yep, that is the entire point. And they did. I really enjoyed them visually. I mean, every time they had an action scene, I was like, okay, their stunt choreographers like knew what they were doing in terms of like making it look good. Like, yeah, sure, some stuff is illogical, but whatever, it looks cool, okay? But again, I feel like I wanted to be more emotionally invested in all of the lightsaber duels, because my favorite lightsaber duel, I mean, of course, the Darth Maul one is like the coolest to look at, but my favorite will always be the one in Empire, because that's the most emotionally charged one, and that's the one where I cared the most about the outcome.
So that's what my position has always been. What made the lightsaber duels in Star Wars in the first couple movies so great is that, forget about the choreography, is that they were verbally sparring along the way. They were really taunting each other, right? And a lot of characterization and story was being portrayed as they were physically dueling. And we didn't really get much of that in this. ZAKI, agree, disagree?
I do agree. Yeah. I mean, I always enjoy looking at a lightsaber fight, but I can't say I was particularly captivated by it. I feel like a little goes a long way sometimes with this.
Yeah. All right. Final thoughts, real quick. Yay or nay, or somewhere in the middle? Ahsoka, what do we think? ZAKI?
It's a yay for me, but fully stipulating that I hope some of the pacing issues get ironed out if and when there's another season.
KRASAVA?
It's an for me. It was good seeing the familiar characters again, But at the same time, in the first episode, you know, Sabine takes, you know, a lightsaber to the gut and survives. Like Ahsoka falls off a cliff, but she survives. Like if we're going to, you know, actually like raise the stakes here, like we have to get some emotion to go with it.
All right, Mary.
Like visually nice, and of course I did love that there was, you know, a woman-led Star Wars show, and I'm afraid if we give it too much criticism, they're never going to give us another one because they're going to say it's because of the women and not because of the writing. But man, that writing needed some work.
Mm. So I'm a yay, but I want them to step up their game. And if there's a season 2, they need to step up their game. All right. So that was great. But now it's time for a special segment on the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories that I created just for this show. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are Attack of the Clones, Witch Doctor, Jedi Powers, Spin the Droid, Tenet Among the Stars, Inspector Gadget, and Ghost in the Shell. Mary, because you're one and 100, you get to go first. You ready?
Oh boy.
All right, what do we got today? And you got Attack of the Clones. All right, if you could clone yourself so that 2 identical copies of you were out and about in the world, would you do it?
Heck no. One of me's enough.
Oh,
Really stick
amen,
firm most of the time.
amen to that, sister. Just kidding. Okay, all right, KRASAVA, you're up next. You ready?
No.
All right, what do we got for you? And you got a Ghost in the Shell. All right, this is a new one. What do we got for you? All right, so Hera pilots her own ship, the Ghost, but little did she know that actual ghosts inhabit the ship. What kind of ghosts, and you can't say Force ghosts, live there?
What is that? Let's say, okay, I can't say Force Ghosts. Can I say the Night Sisters, the ghosts of the Night Sisters? Because they're like living undead anyway.
All right, fair enough. Okay. All right, ZAKI, you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, for you, we got no. Okay, Witch Doctor. Okay, so what do we got here? Oh, lordy. What did we do for you? Okay, being part of the Rebel Alliance is not easy on the soul or the body. After a full day of Jediing, which kind of doctor is most needed?
Chiropractor.
I was just going to say that I just came back from the chiropractor an hour ago. All right, good for you. All right, so now we're going to pick your poison. I've got 4 choices for you, A, B, C, and D. I'm not going to tell you what's behind each one, and you get to pick. All right, ZAKI, you're up first. A, B, C, or D?
B.
B. All right. So now we're going to get real. You ready?
Let's do it.
This is AI and you. As a new system thrust upon us seemingly overnight, AI is sinking its digital teeth into the publishing world. What do you think about the impact, and movies as well? What do you think about the impact AI is having now on the writing and the publishing and writing community, and where it might lead?
I mean, it troubles me from a whole host of perspectives. Obviously, as a critic, you know, I want to believe that it's my voice that makes my writing worthwhile and worth, you know, commissioning. But I think there's a lot of organizations that are just gonna find a way to build off of, you know, some chat GPT output. The other thing I'll say is as an instructor, as a professor, I mean, this has been a pebble in my shoe for the last year and a half, because I'm having to fend off, you know, students who are submitting chat GPT generated papers and whatnot, and I'm having to deploy all kinds of AI detectors. I mean, it's a pain in my ass from multiple directions. You know,
how does that actually? So a student hands in a paper, and you say, "There's no way you wrote this."
Yeah.
Like how do you what's the mechanics? How do you actually deal with that?
So I have several AI generating websites that I have bookmarked, and if I get multiple positives that are sort of confirming each other, then I feel reasonably certain saying that this is AI generated, and I will reach out to the student. What I've done is I'm approaching it like, hey, just as a reminder, I don't want you using AI for your submissions. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say, not what ChatGPT has to say. So how about give it another try and resubmit it? And that's been my sort of soft foot approach up to this point, so that they know that I'm paying attention and they know that I don't want them, you know, doing it that way. And that's worked for me thus far. I haven't had to go too much harsher yet.
Do you think at some point you'll have to put in sort of like the core syllabus, you know, AI generated content is an automatic fail?
I have it in there. I say I'm monitoring for ChatGPT, but I'm at this point I'm trying to give them an off ramp.
Right.
So that's my approach right now. But yeah, I mean, obviously if it's more than one you know, violation, then I'm going to have to be more firm about it.
Right. All right, KRASAVA. All right, you got A, C, or D?
Let's go C.
All right. Ooh, all right. We're gonna give you some truth serum. You ready?
Oh,
Okay,
no.
I got 10 Star Wars questions. Here we go.
Oh,
Animated,
no.
animated or live action shows?
Animated.
Favorite Jedi?
Qui-Gon Jinn.
Favorite Padawan?
Ahsoka.
Thrawn or Tarkin?
Thrawn.
Wang or 3PO?
C-3PO.
Vader or Darth Maul?
Maul.
Rey or Sabine?
Sabine.
Blaster?
Based on Rebels. Based on Rebels, not Ahsoka.
Yep. Blaster or lightsaber?
Lightsaber.
Force powers or witches powers?
Force powers.
Okay. Any character from the Star Wars universe you'd like to see get a better or more expanded storyline?
Qui-Gon Jinn.
All right. Fair enough. Okay. Mary, so you got A or D?
D.
All right. So mirror, mirror. What is this? Uh-oh. Are we doing this again? Oh, I love this one. Okay. You can gain Jedi powers in the real world as it is today. But to do so, there would be a Sith Lord to balance things out, whose powers in equal but opposite strength would also be in the world with the two of you in a long-standing battle. To get Jedi powers, would you sign up for that?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Because I know neither of us would be doing anything important or useful with our powers. So I feel like the villain would not be that dangerous because we'd both just be throwing flips off the building just on opposite sides of the world or something.
Okay, all right, fair enough. All right, we're going to take some comments or questions. Let's see, what do we got here? We got one here. Maybe it's me, but Sabine is already a Mandalorian. Was it necessary for her to also be a Jedi? What do you guys think? Mary, what do you think? Well, see, you don't have history, so she does come from the right. She had the Mandalorian gear, right, and training. What do you think?
Yeah, I actually don't think it was necessary for her to be a Jedi because the whole thing that everybody has to be a Jedi in order to be a hero in the Star Wars universe always kind of rubbed me the wrong way because at the end of the day, the Jedi are kind of a paramilitary force, if you will, and it's like there are lots of ways to be a hero, and the idea that being a Jedi is it seems off. And meanwhile, Sabine already has combat powers. I mean, I would have liked if there was a way for her to commune with the Force that wasn't necessarily involved with, you know, lightsabers and stuff. Like maybe there could have been a more religious or spiritual aspect that they could have explored. But yeah, I mean, I get it. It's like, you know, they wanted her to be Ahsoka's Padawan, and there was that whole relationship, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, I don't know if it was necessary.
All right. Anybody else have any thoughts? And same, different, same, different?
Same.
All right.
Same.
All right. Fair enough. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to call it a night. All right. What do we got here? All right. So, Mary, talk to me. What are we looking at here?
This is the cover of the most recent Brave New Girls anthology about girls doing techie things in sci-fi worlds. It came out in July. We do about, it has come out to be about one a year. We've missed a year or two here and there, but yeah. And then the proceeds from sales of the anthology go to the Society of Women Engineers Scholarship Fund. All the stories are about girls who are smart and brave and use their STEM skills to save the day in a sci-fi setting.
Yes, and this is what, like, this is the book, what, 6 or 7?
That's our 7th anthology. Yeah, we
Wow.
put it out in 2015, and we thought it was just going to be one, and then people kept asking for them. So as long as they keep asking for them, we'll keep making them.
And for those who don't know, because of the sales of Brave New Girls, they've literally sent thousands and thousands of dollars for scholarship money. So having been a part of it, a couple of them myself, and just for the whole endeavor, Mary, you guys are doing something really special and very generous. So it's all very much appreciated, and the opportunities that you give to so many writers to share in that experience and the readers themselves. So good on you. Good on you. All right. As for me, since we're talking about some space opera, I'm going to encourage you to check out my novel Crossline. In Crossline, pilot Marcus Powell he's testing out, this is modern day, he's testing out warp thrusters, and if they work, they're going to revolutionize space travel as we know it. But for reasons I will not explain, he's forced through a wormhole and ends up in a parallel universe where the two remaining factions are at each other's throats, and it's really at a moment in that history where it's winner take all. But meanwhile, back on our Earth, Powell's wife and his young daughter fear that the executives who launched his flight in the first place do not have his best interests at heart. So in a race against the clock, the two of them charge towards the Tower Command Center to help bring Powell back home alive. Crossline is a novel that asks, basically, once you cross that line, can you ever really go back? Crossline's available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. And I encourage you to check it out. And as for KRASAVA, check out our Star Wars reviews. And for ZAKI, he talks about Star Wars and movies and all sorts of great stuff. So make sure that you're paying attention to what he's doing, because he's always great to listen to, as he was tonight. All right, folks, that's our show. I want to thank my guests, Mary 1 in 100, ZAKI, and KRASAVA for stopping by, and to everyone who's watching at home. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro. Again, this was our 100th episode, so thank you everyone who came out tonight. And for those who want or watching now or watch it later, this show could not exist for 100 episodes if it wasn't for you guys, because if you didn't watch, I wouldn't keep doing it. So you do. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and as always, be kind, be gentle, and be generous of spirit, and I'll see you all next week. That's it, guys. Thanks a lot and have a great week. Bye now.